All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to our webinar today called Personality Plus. I'm very excited about sharing this webinar, largely because personality and understanding the different aspects of personality has made a significant difference in my life and in my relationships. So I feel like there's great potential here for better understanding ourselves and others and communicating effectively and ultimately connecting with others, connecting with ourselves. So I'm excited to share this with you. And for some of you, you have taken personality quizzes or assessments over the years. I think the first time I took a personality assessment was in high school. And over the years have taken a number of them, and every time I do, I learn something new about myself, about personality, and so I hope that today you will learn something new about yourself, learn something new about others, and really just see this as an introduction to personality. If you haven't taken any personality assessments before, and maybe we can talk more about it even afterwards. So again, welcome. As we get started, some of you may recognize this gentleman. This is Bruce Springsteen. And I recently heard an interview with Bruce Springsteen that made me think about this webinar and our conversation about personality today. He was talking about how on stage he is so outgoing and so energetic, and I mean he's a showman, and his concerts are just amazing and all this energy. But he was talking about how as he was growing up, he was very shy, very quiet. And the interviewer asked him, do you feel like there's an extrovert and an introvert inside you that sometimes compete? And Bruce Springsteen answered this question. He said, I think we all feel like that. I resonated with that. I'm one of those people that I feel like there's both an extrovert and an introvert inside of me, and they sometimes compete. Sometimes I can't get enough of people and being around people, and other times I just want to be at home and spend some quiet time alone, and yet I feel tension between the two. Now, I know that there are some of you who probably don't feel this tension, and maybe you feel like you're all one way or all the other. But for a lot of us, it's a mix, right? And one of the limitations that I've found in trying to understand personality is that we tend to feel like, oh, it pushes us into a box, like we have to be this or we have to be that. And I really want to talk to you about personality in a way that gets us outside of the boxes and moves beyond any of the labels that we have. But there is this idea, I want you to think about this idea that Bruce Springsteen raises, that he is this person who's on stage and he comes across as the world's greatest extrovert. But here he says in an interview, I'm kind of a quiet person. I like time to myself. So as I thought about that, I thought about this quote, and perhaps you have heard this quote as well, by William Shakespeare. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. So I was thinking about this and the fact that, I mean, not all of us are literally on a stage or performing. Maybe some of us are. But even if we're not literally on a stage and literally giving a performance, how often do we feel like we do have to kind of put on a performance to interact with others? Maybe when we go to work, maybe, when it's with relatives or, people that we're just getting to know. And it's true that we really do have these exits and these entrances, and we play many, many parts throughout life. So the question then comes, if we really play all these parts and are sometimes on stage, how do we know our true personality? Along with that question is the question, does personality change in different situations? Now, we'll talk a little bit about the theory of personality, and that the theory is our personalities stay the same over the course of our lifetime. However, in reality, and I find in real life, sometimes we do change, and we would say, well, my personality, it's different. Maybe when I was younger than it is now. I've had friends who have been just scared to death to be up front, to do anything in front of people. But over time, they start to do something little, and they maybe just make an announcement in front of people, and then they do something a little bit more, and over time they become more and more comfortable. And I've known friends who have gone from despising being up front in front of people and not enjoying it all to really being quite comfortable and really enjoying that process. So does personality change in different situations, in different circumstances? We want to look a little bit at this. So what exactly is personality? And starting off, there's a lot of different definitions that you can find out there, but we're going to look at it as personality refers to individual differences in characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. So in other words, what is our personality? Well, we all have individual differences, and we have different patterns in the way that we think, in the way that we feel and express our emotions, and then in turn how that impacts our behavior and how we interact with each other. So this is our personality, and this definition comes from the American Psychological Association. When we look at personality theory, we won't go into this very deeply, but just as a brief background, Carl Jung is the psychologist who really developed the theory of what we call psychological type, and a lot that's behind personality theory goes back to Carl Jung's writings. Now, if you haven't heard of Carl Jung, maybe you've heard of Sigmund Freud. He's quite popular. They were contemporaries, and they actually worked together for a while, but then they kind of parted ways and had differences of opinions and approaches. So Freud studied the kind of the dysfunctional side of human life, and Carl Jung wanted to study normal people and like more of the functional side. And he really studied and wrote extensively about the psychological type. His writings aren't that easy to understand. So along the way, this mother-daughter team, Isabel Myers and Catherine Briggs, really dove into his writings and studied his work and worked really to make Carl Jung's writings more accessible. And they developed a type indicator, and you'll hear this Myers-Briggs type indicator, or MBTI, it gets abbreviated as. And this is really based on Carl Jung's work, but it's what this mother-daughter team, Isabel and Catherine, worked to develop so that people could really understand in everyday terms what their personality is all about. Now, psychological type, personality, what's the benefit of it? Well, it provides a vocabulary to express needs, expectations, preferences, and conflict. So this in my own life has been a part that I feel is so valuable to me because it gives language. It allows me to be able to put words to needs that I have, to expectations, to different preferences I have, and to work through conflict. So this having a vocabulary to talk about ourselves, to talk with others, is one of the significant benefits of understanding personality and type. Now, when we look at this, we're not doing any sort of assessment towards intelligence or skill or abilities or mental health. So completely different areas when we're looking at personality. Now, our brain preferences. Our brains are sort of pre-wired in different ways. And remember when we looked at the definition of personality, we said, well, we all have these individual differences, okay? Some of that comes to how our brains are pre-wired. So are you right or left-handed? So think about, you're right or left-handed. Now, you didn't choose to be right or left-handed. Usually, like, we just are. We just naturally have a preference for using our right hand or our left hand. Or there's a few people in the world who are ambidextrous and can use both just as skillfully. But our brains somehow are pre-wired that as we grow and we're young toddlers, we tend to start using our right hand or our left hand more. Now, wherever you are, if you can grab a pen or a pencil, something to write with, and just a scratch piece of paper, I'd like for you to sign your name and write the date. And if you don't have anything available, just kind of go through the motions of signing your name and writing the date, so that you just have the feel of what it feels like, okay? Now, probably for most of you, you're doing this and you're not even thinking about it. It just comes very, very easily, okay? Now, the next thing I want you to do is I want you to now sign your name with your non-dominant hand, okay? So if you're right-handed, now put the pen or pencil in your left hand, and I want you to sign your name. If you're left-handed, switch to your right hand, sign your name, see how it goes, okay? And again, if you don't have a place to actually write, just pretend you're holding a pen or a pencil in your non-dominant hand, and what does it feel like? Okay, so what is it like? Most of the time, we can do it, right? Like we can write with our non-dominant hand. It might remind you of your handwriting in first grade, though. You might say, "Oh, it's awkward, and it's a little bit different to even figure out how to hold the pen or the pencil, and then I have to concentrate more on the letters and make sure that I'm not making my S backwards, and I have to think about it." You know, when you sign your name with your dominant hand, you don't even think about it, but now all of a sudden I have to think about it. So here's what I want you to notice about this. First of all, you can sign and write your name with your dominant hand without even thinking about it. Some of you might have initially said, "Oh, I can't do that. I can't write with my non-dominant hand." But if you actually did it, then you'll notice that you can. It is possible to write with your left hand. It's awkward, or in my case, it's my left hand, but your non-dominant hand. For me, with my left hand, it's awkward. I have to concentrate more. It's not as smooth, but it is possible. Now, as we talk about personality today, we're going to be looking at preferences in 4 different areas. And we're going to say, you know, we have a preference that's similar to being right or left-handed. And our brain is pre-wired for one of these preferences to be a little bit stronger than the other. For some of us, a lot stronger than the other. But just because we have a preference doesn't mean we can't use the non-dominant preference. Okay, so keep this in mind as we go through. We'll come back to this along the way. Now, these preferences with being right or left-handed, another way that we can look at these is it's like, well, do you like chocolate ice cream or do you like vanilla ice cream? Okay, now I know there's somebody out there who's like, I like both, right? But there's definitely some of you who say chocolate. I mean, 100% of the time I'm going to go for the chocolate. Like vanilla's okay, sure, but it's vanilla, right? Like chocolate is where it's at. And others of you, when I was a kid growing up, I didn't like chocolate ice cream. I only liked vanilla. And so some of you might say, I'm definitely a vanilla person. Interestingly enough, we can look at this in personality. When I was a kid, I would 100% of the time, if you gave me the choice, chocolate or vanilla, I'd say I want vanilla. I don't like chocolate ice cream. As I have grown, I've become an adult, I like chocolate ice cream. Now, it's still not, my favorite. It's not what I go to first, but I've had some really delicious chocolate ice cream. So I can say I've developed more of a preference for chocolate ice cream. Another example, coffee or tea. Are you a coffee person or are you a tea person? I'm a little bit of both, but I say, well, I'm more of a tea person. I enjoy coffee too, but if I had to choose, then I'd do tea first. So keep this in mind as we go through these different personality types and preferences, because I'm going to be asking you to choose, are you this or are you more this? And there's going to be times where you're going to feel like, I'm both. I like both. I like both chocolate and vanilla. And if that's the case, it is very possible that you equally, prefer both. But you might think, well, if I was given both chocolate and vanilla ice cream, which one would I eat first? Or which one would I save for last? Because I want that to be my last bite. So that idea sometimes can help you tease out the differences with personality preferences. Now, these personality preferences are what we call dichotomous, okay? It's like a pencil where you can use both, but you can only use one at a time. All right, so we're going to be looking at two different perspectives, and it's like having a pencil where you have an eraser on one end and you have the point on the other end to write with. Now, you use both ends of the pencil, but you can only use one end at a time, okay? So we'll keep this in mind as we go through this as well. That, remember when we wrote our name with our dominant hand? Okay, well, that's one side. Then we can write with our non-dominant hand, and one feels better than the other, but we can do one or the other. That's the sort of approach with these preferences and these types that we have with our personality. So preference is essentially the hardwiring of our brains, for example, being right or left-handed. This does not remove the option of using non-preference. So keep this in mind, because this is where we get sometimes we get stuck in the boxes of personality, and this helps us take it outside the boxes, where just because we have a preference doesn't mean we can't use the non-preference. Our preferences give us insight into what is automatic or default for us. Same as, okay, well, this is my dominant hand, non-dominant. Same, that, okay, this is my go-to. This is automatic for me. Sometimes I have to choose to do what's not automatic. And preference does not equal skill or ability, okay? All right, so let's look at the different function types and preferences that we're going to look at. So the first area we're going to look at, we'll go into each of these in detail, is where we get our energy and where is our orientation. In other words, where does our energy come from and where is our focus? The second part we're going to look at is called perceiving. And this is all about how our brain takes in information. Okay, we're taking in information every day, what we see and hear and touch and taste and smell. All this information is coming into the brain. The perceiving preferences are about how we take in information. And then we have the judging preferences. These are how we make decisions. Okay, so we take in all of this information in our brains, and then we make decisions with it. So the judging preferences will look at how we make decisions. And then we look at our inner-outer world. What part of ourselves do we, quote unquote, wear on the outside and wear on the inside? Okay, so we're going to look at these four areas: the energy/orientation part of ourselves, the perceiving, the judging, and the inner-outer world. Now, the energy and orientation piece. We started off talking about Bruce Springsteen and how he says on stage, I'm this strong extrovert. You'd think I was the most extroverted person in the whole world if you see me on stage. But off stage, I'm more of an introvert. Now, some of you might already have an idea of where you fall between these two, extrovert, introvert. But let's look at some of the specifics that really kind of help us identify, well, are you more of an extrovert or an introvert? So for extroversion, this preference tends to focus on the external world, okay? What's outside of me? Energy tends to come from the environment, okay? So the people that I'm around, or even just the environment in general that I'm in. Someone who is extroverted tends to be action-oriented. They want to do things and take action. These people tend to be expressive and share their thoughts, their feelings. they're more publicly disclosing. So they're just, it's easier for them to share about themselves, personal information about themselves. They tend to be interested in a breadth of ideas and hobbies. So lots of different things are of interest to them, and they enjoy exploring all of these different areas. Now, they may not be an expert in any one of them, but it's okay because they like having a variety. And someone who is extroverted speaks to think. So if you ask this person a question, they're probably going to start talking immediately. And as they talk, they're going to be organizing their thoughts through speaking. Some of you might have heard the term brain dump. And this is oftentimes like, I just need to talk. There's all this stuff in my brain and it's all tangled up and I just need to dump it all out, talk about it in order to organize it. This is often how it works for an extrovert. Now let's compare that with the introversion. An introvert focuses more on the internal world, okay? Internal to themselves. Energy comes from time alone, quiet times. Introverts prefer time to reflect. Again, things that are happening internally. They tend to be more reserved, more contained. They're going to be a little more publicly guarded, not as quick to open up and share. An introvert is going to pursue more of a depth of knowledge. So they're going to have a smaller amount of areas that they're really interested in, but they're going to go deep. They're going to understand and know everything about them. So it's not so much that breadth, it's looking at the depth. And an introvert thinks first before speaking. So if you're talking with an introvert and you ask them a question, chances are they're going to just be silent initially. And they're going to think, and they're thinking and they're organizing their thoughts in their mind. And then by the time they speak, they've already organized things. Now, sometimes it can be difficult to know. Am I extrovert? Am I introvert? If you see different people, so an extrovert and an introvert doing the same activity, you may not notice the difference right away. So if an extrovert and an introvert are both walking by themselves on a path through the woods, the introvert is likely to be absorbed in their own thoughts and be thinking about things that have happened and maybe people in their lives, and maybe there's a problem that they're trying to solve, and they're walking along, and all of the focus is what's going on inside their mind. The extrovert, again, walking alone down the same path in the woods, is probably going to be very focused on, oh, look at the leaf, look at this new little bud that has just sprouted. Oh, wow. And look at the little, gecko or whatever it is running across the trail, and oh, there's a rabbit up ahead, and oh, there's my favorite tree, and focus more on the external world. So I want you to think for yourself for a moment, and I'm going to ask you the question of, would you say your preference is for extrovert or introvert? Okay, and so take a moment now to vote for yourself. Do you say that you are an extrovert, an introvert, or would you say it's so close for you, you can't even tell? Okay, so if you're listening by phone or if you're watching the recording of this later, you won't get to see this part, but right now I'm asking our attendees to share with us, are they feeling like they're more of an extrovert, more of an introvert, or some of both? And we'll see how our audience polls today. So, all right. So today in the group that's watching, it looks like we have 43% who are extroverts and 29% who are introverts and 29% who are saying it's close, for feeling like it's both. I'm right in the middle. So a few more of the extroverts right now. All right, let's move on to the next section, the perceiving preference, and see where you feel like you fall on this. Now remember, the perceiving preference, this is all about how your brain takes in information. And here we call this sensing and intuition, all right? Now, someone whose brain is wired more for sensing and taking in information in this way is going to be focused more on the present. They prefer specific details. They tend to be detail-oriented. They interpret information literally. Someone who prefers sensing likes actual information, and they depend on the 5 senses to gather information. So preferring details, focused on the here and now, what's actually present, what I can literally see and know and do, okay? So this is the brain taking in information in a way that is, we call it sensing. Again, think details, think focused on the present. Now let's compare that to intuition. If your brain is wired to be geared towards intuition and bringing in information this way, you tend to be more focused on the future, and you're looking at possibilities. Big picture, what's the big picture? Okay, so you're always kind of like stepping back and like, well, what's the big picture view? Someone who prefers intuition is looking for and finding patterns, okay? They're interpreting information figuratively rather than the literal interpretation of someone who is sensing. And they like theoretical information. And finally, they use what we call like the 6th sense. You know, we talk about intuition being this 6th sense that some people have. And so let me give you an example for sensing and intuition. I guess it's been a couple years ago now. My husband, John, and I were having a conversation, and we were talking about our finances. And I was like, let's talk about, you know, kind of like our financial goals. Where do we want to be in, you know, 5 years or so? And I'm thinking, you know, kind of big picture, and, you know, well, what do we want to do? Do we want to invest here? Do we want to save? Do we want to, you know, what are the things we want to kind of do with our money? What are our big goals? John's response was, okay, well, let's look at our bank account and see how much money is in the bank account. And it's funny because I was just like, wait a minute, that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the future. Like, this has nothing to do with what's in our bank account now. But you can see the difference here with the sensing and the intuition. So John was approaching the conversation from a sensing perspective. The details, the here and now. Well, let's look at the balance in the bank account now. I was looking at future possibility. Let's just dream. Let's just talk. Let's just see what we can imagine for the future. And it created some disconnect in our conversation, as you could imagine. But it gives you a good example of, okay, here's a practical difference that you might see in someone who is sensing or someone who's intuitive. Another example is someone who prefers sensing is going to look for the tried and true methods. Like if there's a process and a procedure to be followed that works, well, then someone who is sensing wants to follow that process and procedure every time. Someone who prefers intuition, even if you have a process that works, you're going to be like, yeah, but what else could we do? What if we just tried this one time? And someone who is sensing going to be like, why? Why should we even try it? Because we know this works. Let's stick to the tried and true. So, and I just want to take a moment and say that no one of these is any better than the other. They're just different. They're just different ways that we take in information, that we interact with the world. So I want to ask you now, what is your preference for sensing or intuition? So as you hear these, which one do you resonate more with? Do you resonate with the sensing? Do you resonate with the intuition? Or do you feel like, oh, it's too close to say? So take a moment and think, what do you think for yourself? Sensing or intuition? All right, our votes are coming in. Give it just another second to see if anybody else puts in their preferences. Okay, so for this poll, we have 33% saying, I resonate with sensing, more of a detail-oriented person, and 67% say, now I resonate with the intuition, more of the big picture piece. So, and all of you there seems like it was pretty easy to say one or the other. Nobody felt like you were right on the line there. So, all right. The next preference that we'll look at is the judging preference. Now, this is all about how we make decisions, okay? So the last piece, the perceiving function, that preference, this was all about, okay, we're taking in information. So now we have all this information we've taken in. Now we make decisions with this information. And our two preferences here are called thinking and feeling. Now, if it were up to me, I have to tell you, I would change these terms, because even if you're a thinker, you still feel. If you are a feeler, you still think. So the terms sometimes can get a little, again, we want to try and stay away from those boxes, but these are the terms that have been used. So let's look at what's meant by thinking and feeling when it comes to the judging preference. Again, how do we make decisions? So someone who prefers thinking for making decisions is going to be very objective. They use cause-effect logic. They seek out clarity. They have an analytical approach to decision-making. They put the problem first and people second. They have a tendency to critique, and they focus more on justice. Okay, so this is the thinking preference. This is someone who makes decisions out of the thinking preference. So let's compare now to the feeling preference. Someone who's making decisions based out of this feeling preference is going to be more subjective in their decision making. They're going to use person-centered values to help make their decision. They're seeking harmony. Can't we get along? Let's look for ways that we can get along. They approach decisions situationally. So it depends, right? Like, it depends on the situation, what my decision will be. They put people first and the problem second. They are quick to show appreciation, and they focus more on mercy. So, thinking and feeling. How do we make decisions? Again, I'm going to use example from my marriage, because there's just so many examples here that I can use with my husband, John, and I. John is the thinking preference when it comes to this area. I am the feeling preference. Okay, so John thinks through decision making very objectively, looks at the problem, analyzes it. People come second or third or fourth, or like, it doesn't matter. I mean, here's the problem, we have to fix it. Okay, I am much more subjective. I'm worried about values and my values and your values and how this decision is going to impact our relationship. And I put people first, and I put problems second. And really what matters most is how we all feel when the decision is made. So an example of this, several years ago, we were living in the Philippines, and for a brief period of time, we had a gentleman who was working for us, and just part-time. I needed some extra help, and I was considering, okay, well, maybe I could use, it's kind of convenient to have somebody you can ask to help with things. Maybe we'll have him work for us a little bit more. And so I was considering hiring him more on a permanent basis, but I found out that he was not being completely honest with us. So I was pretty upset. And I called John at work and I told him what I'd found out. And John's response is, well, I'll fire him. I'll fire him today. Like, don't even think about it. And I was like, well, let's talk about it first. And like, well, what about, I don't know, like, what about how's it going to impact him and his family? And I was like thinking about the person, and John just put the problem first. So it ends up, John went through the process of firing this gentleman, and he came home and he's like, that was kind of fun. Like, he felt energized. And I was like, oh, how was he? How did he take it? You know, and like, I was like worried and distraught. And for John, it was like, that was easy. You know, let's do it again. And so we see the differences between the thinking and the feeling. And again, there's not a right way and a wrong way. It's just that we have different approaches. Now, if you tend to be a thinker and you have more of that thinking approach to making decisions, you might feel like this is the right way, right? Like this is the way that we should make decisions, objectively, analytically, look at the problem, right? But if you are in that feeling side here, then you'll be like, well, wait a minute, like it's not just all black and white, right? Like there's a lot of gray areas, and it really well, how does it impact people, right? So there's a lot more nuance to it. So I'm curious to see, I'll let you share now, what would you say your preference is for thinking or feeling? So take a moment and share what you think. More thinking, more feeling? Do you feel like you're a combination? You kind of go back and forth between both of them. All right, we'll let you take another few seconds and decide what do you resonate more with? More thinking, more feeling? Is it just it's hard to decide? You're kind of on the fence between the two. Okay, let's see. So the group today, 50% resonate with thinking, 17% with feeling, and 33% saying, I feel pretty close to both. So we've got some thinkers, we've got some feelers, and we've got some people who are right on the fence. And this is interesting when you feel like you're on the fence between the two. Remember the pencil that I showed you early on and said these preferences are dichotomous. Like we're either using the eraser end of the pencil or we're using the writing end of the pencil. It's sort of the same thing. Like we can use both our thinking and our feeling, but we're usually either in one mode or the other. Okay, so again, this is where it gets very interesting, and I find it really useful because as I was giving you that example of me and John, he knows that I'm a feeler. I know that he's a thinker, and we use this language. Okay, so this is where it comes into, this gives us vocabulary to use. And there's times where I know that I need to get into my thinking mode. Now, it's not natural for me. It's not my go-to. It's like writing with my non-dominant hand, but I can do it. I have to concentrate. I have to really think about it. And it can really make a big difference when I can get into that thinking mode. Now, same for John. Sometimes I have to say, hey, John, I just need you to like get into your feeling mode for a few moments and just kind of see it from my perspective. And he's able to do that. So we take turns kind of getting into, the thinking mode, the feeling mode, to be able to communicate and connect more effectively. All right, our fourth area is this inner outer world, okay? Kind of what do we put on the outside? And we have the judging and the perceiving, okay? So now remember, we just talked about the judging, the thinking, the feeling. This is how we make decisions. The perceiving was the sensing and intuition, and that's how we take in information. And so here it's like, okay, well, which side kind of like shows up more to the outside world? Is it that decision-making side? Okay, if so, that's like more of the judging? Or is it that taking in information side of ourselves that shows up more to the outside world? That's going to be the perceiving. Let's look at some of the characteristics of this, because this really gives us insight into how we structure both our inner and outer world. So someone who prefers judging here likes closure, and they seek out that closure. They like a structured life. They order their life and their calendar. You can look at their calendar and it's got plans and details out for weeks, months, maybe even the whole year. They're pretty decisive in decision making. Like, it's pretty easy. Okay, here's the decision. Let's go. Move forward. They desire control. And they tend to be directive of others. Okay, so telling other people what to do in a clear way. Okay, so this is the judging preference. They also tend to be an early starter. Okay, so if you have a project due at the end of the month, then you're going to start on that project as soon as possible and work at that project over time. And as time goes along, you're going to be getting more and more done. Okay, so an early starter. The perceiving preference here. Okay, they like to keep their options open. They have more of an open-ended life. They're more kind of go with the flow. Well, let's see what comes up. They're more tentative in decision making. Okay, because they're waiting to see, is there any new information that's going to come along that will impact the decision that I make? These people tend to be a little more flexible and adaptable. And they're more non-directive. So they might, facilitate others, but they're not going to, be quite as directive. And these people are pressure prompted. So this is in contrast to the early starter. The early starter, like we mentioned, starts as soon as possible, works over time, gets more and more done. Someone who's pressure prompted is going to be putting it off, and as we get closer and closer to that deadline, the pressure's building, and then the creativity comes and the productivity comes the closer to the deadline. Okay, now I want to say one thing about this, and that's for those of you who say, well, I'm some of both. It happens. I have a friend who is J. They say, oh, I really like a structured life. I'm very organized. But the one thing that's different about me is that I'm pressure prompted. I see myself at the last minute, like that's when everything comes together. And so sometimes you have a combination of traits from both sides of these. So be thinking about, okay, the judging, the more structured, the perceiving, the less structured. And to give you an example, if you're kind of wondering like, okay, well, what side am I? I'm kind of on both. If you think about, you have a weekend where you have absolutely nothing planned. And as you are going into the weekend, how do you approach that weekend? Do you approach that weekend by saying, oh, let me look, here's all the things I want to do. I'm going to make a list. Here's the things. Look, I have a whole weekend free. Let me put together a plan and schedule out how I'm going to use my time. Or do you approach that weekend and you're like, I have a weekend free. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to just go to bed, and then I'll decide what I want to do in the morning when I wake up, whenever I wake up. So if you're more of the put a plan together, schedule your free weekend, make sure that you accomplish tasks, that's more of the J, the judging preference here. If you're more of a, I don't know what I'm going to do, I'm just going to sleep in and see what I feel like doing when I wake up. If I feel like doing anything at all, that would be more of the perceiving preference here. So let's look one more time. Let's see, what would you say your preference is for judging or perceiving? So take a moment to cast your vote. Do you feel like you're more structured, more open-ended, combination, a little bit of both? Let's see what our audience says today. All right, the votes are coming in. Let's see if you have anybody else to share. Okay, so our audience today says 43% of you resonate with that judging, having a structured life and calendar and being very orderly and decisive. And 57% of you say, no, more open-ended. I like to kind of go with the flow. I like to be open in my decision making. So, and nobody was right in the middle on this one. You seemed pretty clear. Now, over the course of these last few slides, you have been identifying, okay, well, am I extrovert, introvert, more sensing, or more intuition, more thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving? And you can put those 4 letters together. Now, this is essentially what the personality test, the Myers-Briggs, the MBTI, does for us through a very structured way. We've done it in a very loose and just kind of a way of self-assessing ourselves. But you can see you can get 16 different combinations of letters. So if you were an introvert and you preferred sensing and thinking and judging, then you come out and those letters are ISTJ. If you are an extrovert and you say, oh, I prefer intuition and feeling and perceiving, well, then you come out as an ENFP. And there's lots of descriptions. You can Google these and you can find general descriptions for each one of these letter combinations. There's lots of information out there about these. This is where a lot of people stop. And this is where my approach to it is, don't stop here. It's just the beginning. Okay, so once we understand our natural preferences, this is just the beginning. Now, how is this just the beginning? Because, you know, we talked about at the very beginning about how we play these different parts, and sometimes we're on stage, you know, whether figuratively or some of us literally, and we have to show up differently. And so some of you, maybe you have identified, I am naturally an introvert, but maybe you're a teacher, and so you have to be in front of a classroom on a daily basis, and you have to be acting in more of an extroverted way. Well, these are good things to know about ourselves, because then we can manage the stress that comes up of when we have to perform or demonstrate these preferences that aren't our natural type. So we talk about something called natural versus demonstrated in our preferences. And again, when you're evaluating and trying to identify your own personality, you I often tell people, imagine you're on a beautiful island all by yourself. You're very happy. It's not like a lonely place. You're just very happy, very content, but you're all by yourself. So all of your decisions you can make are just for you. You don't have to worry about how they impact anyone else. And in that situation, okay, what would be your preference? This is what we would say, this is our natural, you know, our pre-wired preference and personality. Okay, but you and I know in real life, we don't live on islands, right? We interact with people. We have to take into consideration how our behavior impacts someone else, how our decisions impact someone else, who's reliable on us. So we have to take into consideration that we sometimes demonstrate pieces of ourselves that aren't as natural. So this looks at what happens when you are different in different settings or around different people. And this is normal. We don't have to feel like we're not being authentic if we're, you know, showing up differently in different places. It's a normal part of life that we make adjustments depending on the situation that we're in and the people that we're around. What we have to realize is, though, that the more we have to adjust ourselves, the more stress it can be for us, the more energy it can take from us. So that teacher who's naturally an introvert knows that at the end of the day, because they're out in front of people and really like demonstrating that extroversion all day long, they're going to be tired at the end of the day. An extrovert who is a teacher is probably going to feel more energized at the end of the day than they did at the beginning of the day. Okay, so understanding what's natural for us, what we have to sometimes demonstrate, this can help us identify those times of stress and pressure and when our energy is low, and then look for ways to be able to build that energy back up and decrease our stress. Now, there are areas of personality that we say that we can be flexible in. Okay, so there's sort of a new area that's being looked at that's called personality flexibility. And there's actually some skills that have been identified by Roger Pearman, who developed a new personality assessment just here in the last few years called the Pearman Personality Indicator. And he looks at this flex index and he says, okay, well, we have the skill of being proactive, really learning how to maintain our composure, stay connected, seek out variety in our life, find ways to rejuvenate. These are skills that we can use to help us in this personality flexibility. So again, this is taking us outside of the box, outside of the labels, and saying, okay, here's how we are naturally, but in reality, we have to be flexible in our personality. We have to sometimes show up in ways that aren't natural for us. It can be exhausting, it can be draining, but here are some ways that we can help keep ourselves energized and keep our stress level down as much as possible through those times. Now, as we learn more about our own personality, we have more awareness of ourselves. And I believe that this leads to being able to be more aware of others as well. If you think about this picture shows a rowing team. It's very important for every member on the team to be fully aware of themselves and what they're doing, how hard they're pulling on the oars, the timing, and being aware of their teammates. So in order for it to work well, they have to be aware of themselves and the others on their team. And life is the same way for us in our relationships. And personality is a way that we can be more aware of ourselves, and it can lead us to being more aware of others. So the areas that we've talked about today, I've asked you to analyze yourself. What do you feel like you are? But you also might be thinking of other people in your life and people that you care about. And you might be thinking, I think that they're a thinker. I think they're a feeler, or that explains it. That's why they're always, looking at their list and so organized, and I'm just all over the place. Like, you'll notice these things in other people. Okay. This can be helpful in, again, learning how to just understand, be accepting, learning how to kind of flex ourselves to meet the other people where they are, sometimes asking for the other people to flex for us. Sometimes I say to John, hey, I need you to get into your thinking or your feeling mode for me. So sometimes I ask for that from him. So it's a way of us working together as a team, just like these rowers, being very, very aware of ourselves and being aware of others. So if you're interested in learning more about your personality type, there's a lot of different ways to go about this. There's a great free online assessment. If you just Google 16 personalities, it takes about 10 or 15 minutes to fill out the questionnaire online, and you'll get a free summary of your personality. And this is based on the Myers-Briggs, the types that we've been talking about. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, the MBTI, this has been developed over the years and expanded and studied. And this is a paid assessment, but if you want to go a little bit deeper, through my website, you can find some options for taking the MBTI, and you can get a variety of reports that relate to your personality. So maybe you're in the midst of a career transition, and it'll share with you, okay, based on your personality, here's some things for you to think about in your career. Here's the careers that people of similar personality tend to be attracted to. Here's the careers that people of your personality tend to avoid. There's a college report for high school seniors or college freshmen, a nice way to start looking at, okay, how does my personality impact what I'm going to be wanting to do with my life? There's a communication, decision-making, conflict management. So again, we can look at our personality is related to these different areas. The Pyramid Personality Indicator, this one also is a paid assessment, and it goes into a deeper look at our personality, the natural and the demonstrated, and it looks at this flex index that we mentioned briefly. So there's lots of different ways. I encourage you to start with the free one. If you want to get deeper and you want to go into it deeper, then we can look at the MBTI or the Pyramid, and feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about any of those. So we are wrapping up our time here together, and I want to just pause for a moment, see if there's any questions you want to put into the chat box or any comments that you have. And those of you who are introverts, you might want to think about this information for a while, so you might not have anything to say immediately. But I'd love to hear from you later as well. So if you don't have any questions right now, no comments right now, but you are thinking about this and you say, oh, later on you have some questions. I love talking about personality. And again, I've experienced a really positive impact in my own life and better understanding my own personality and my loved ones and people that I work with. And so I encourage you to reach out, whether it's today or later. Please stay connected through lisahopeconnect.com or send me an email. And thank you so much for participating today and being part of the Personality Plus webinar.